I'm continuing my face in clay today with the eyes and the mouth. So just like when I made the nose and I rolled 2 balls of clay for the nostrils to ensure that they are the same size, I do the same thing for my eyeballs. These are pretty small. I'm not working on a super large form. But again, the size of your details of your features is going to be dependent on the effect that you're trying to achieve. So I've scored, this time you see, I usually score with my serrated rib, but because I made the indents for the eye, it's kind of hard to get in there. So I'm just using my sharpened pencil. And I'm just going to tap these down. And I usually ask my students to think about working in layers. And what I mean by that is if we think about our mug itself, our mug form as the skeleton, then the eyes would go on top of that, and then the eyelids would overlap that. So because of that, I want to go ahead and put the iris and the pupil in my eyes, in the eyeball. So I might take something like a colored pencil and just slightly indent. And of course, the eyes at this point are going to look shocked or surprised because it's going to be the full iris and pupil. We know that clay can crack when it stretches. So you can see that my little piece of clay, because again, I'm using that clay that I call gently used, is a little bit drier. It did crack when I pressed into it, but I can correct that by, again, getting just a small amount of water on my brush and going over that surface. The next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to take something. I'm just going to use my paintbrush handle and pop in a pupil. And so we have the beginning of our eye. My mug has stiffened up quite a bit. It's not quite leather, but it is getting towards leather. However, caution students not to press too hard if they're working like I am with the back of their form directly on the tabletop, because if you squeeze it too much, it's going to get cracks on the rim. The next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to make my eyelid, and I'm just going to focus on the right eye for now. So I start making my eyelid by rolling a coil, and I taper it on either end so that it comes to a point. And then I squeeze one edge and make it a little bit like a calzone, I will say. And I talk with my students about whether or not their eye, or their iris, I guess I should say, should be completely exposed. Is it a look of shock and surprise? Should it be a little bit obscured? A resting eye typically is going to be iris would be slightly obscured on the top, but not really on the bottom. So they might roll a couple of coils and experiment with where they want to place the eyelid on their eye. For the bottom eyelid, I can kind of use what I did before to gauge the size. But when we attach it, we want the corners hopefully to meet up. And so we have the beginnings of our eyelids. So I'm going to remove these. Maybe, there we go. Go in and score. Add my slip. And this is another good reason to use a damp paintbrush. So this paintbrush is actually helping to seal this attachment onto the form. So it's smoothing it, yes, it's cleaning up my score marks, but it's also helping it adhere by sealing up the seam. I'm going to get underneath it a little bit. Score my lower eyelid. These are borderline too tiny to score, but want to make sure I am doing my due diligence here. Now the bottom seam can be completely smoothed out, or if you wanted to do a tired eye, or in my case, an older eye, you might want to keep that seam. And typically, not always, a lot of times, the upper eyelid may not have a crease, but sometimes there is a crease. So you may want to go back in and redefine that seam, or if you're using your sharpened pencil, you could even make a new seam. Just make some nice subtle details. There are other things that you could do. Obviously, you could add a little bit of a brow bone and then add some texture to create an eyebrow. Let me see, I think I've got, yeah. So you see on this example that I've created a little bit of a brow bone. I've also built up the cheek and down here in the chin. I'm going to show you a mouth in just a minute. I've given a little bit of a crinkle into the forehead. So think about those other details you can add. Right now, I'm just showing you basics. So we're going to move to the mouth. The mouth is going to be, again, a tapered coil. So a coil that's tapered on either end. And just like with the upper eyelid, we're going to squeeze one edge. And the reason is that from the bottom of the nose to the top lip, or to the bottom, I guess I should say, of the upper lip, it actually comes out at an angle. So it's not just a straight line. So we're going to attach that upper lip directly below the nose, but making sure that it is coming out at a slight angle. Goodness. All right. There we are. And it's going to look a little bit like a mustache at first. And you can shape the upper lip depending, again, on what the expression is. I'm going to rip a little bit off the ends. I explain to my students that the reason we use a tapered coil is because our lips are not the same thickness throughout, And as they move out to the edge, they sort of diminish into our face. And then you can add your philtrum or Cupid's bow, whatever you so choose. And then typically the shape of the lip is actually going to come up from underneath. When I'm making faces, I tell my students that really the eyes and the mouth are the most expressive features, but really the mouth is where you can do a lot in the way of, whether or not you have teeth, the tongue sticking out, a frown, a smile, open, close. They really have a lot of options. If I were going to add teeth, I would probably have the students do it at this point and tuck them up underneath. Remember, working in layers, the lips would overlap the teeth, but you kind of have to establish where the upper lip is going to be before you can attach the teeth. For the bottom lip, again, you have this tapered coil. But instead of flattening one side, I'm just going to leave it round. And then make sure it's the size that you want it to be. So I'm going to make mine just a little bit off center. Then tap it down a little bit. And I'm just going to smooth the seam just on the bottom. We want to keep that seam up top so that we can kind of show the delineation between the lip and the inside of the mouth. Look at it in profile. It's looking pretty good. And then, as I mentioned with this other example, from this point, and this one is not yet finished, you can see it's kind of half done, but I've built up cheekbones, I've built up a little bit of the cheek, I have put a chin. You can see that the brow is coming out a little bit, some creases in the forehead, some additional lines underneath the eyes, and then of course, if you're making a mug, a handle, and you maybe want to put a foot. So let me see. I have this example right here. So you can see here, this doesn't have a handle, but a nice ring foot to give it a little bit of a lift off the table anyway. And that is a face in clay.